Hey, it's Sela Social Studies.
Hey guys, welcome back to Sela's Social Studies, your Chapter 28, your Civil Rights Movement Review. Study, study, study. Remember again, this is just a helpful type, last minute type, hey, I'm going to watch this to make sure I know what I'm talking about because, like I said, read your note sheet 3 times. That's a good way to do it. And go ahead, study, play the quizzes, play the Kahoots, do something, read your note sheet 3 times. And then go ahead and watch the video to sit there and really just give that last refresher. All right, we're going to go through civil rights movements, Supreme Court cases and movements. All right, we started off with Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896. That gives out the separate but equal doctrine. What that said is that segregation or separation of the races was legal in the United States as long as facilities were separate but equal. That's that separate but equal doctrine. Okay. And we know that reality was they were separate, but they were never equal. Okay. So you have the NAACP coming through, who is going to go ahead and start helping fighting the segregation. First battle stop is in schools. Okay. So you remember the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, step in, and Thurgood Marshall, one of their lawyers, future Supreme Court Justice, goes ahead and starts fighting against school segregation, right? In 1954, Brown v. Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas, you have where now segregation in public schools is illegal, right? They're not allowed to segregate in public schools anymore. Remember what we said the problem with that is that the court system never gave schools a time frame to go ahead and make sure that desegregation was going to happen. The integration of school between colors and white kids, they say, yeah, sure, go ahead, on your timetable, make it happen. And remember, like I said, we still have some that are segregated today in the United States. So that's Brown v. Board. Then you had the Little Rock Nine, those 9 outstanding black students who integrated Little Rock Central High School. And if you remember what I said there, those poor 9 students were treated terribly. They were spit on, like seriously, so much that the one girl said she went home and wrung out her dress. All right, it was covered in so much spit. They were beaten. They were, name called every day. You could just look up some pictures of what happened during the Little Rock Nine. Now, there were some things that we don't know, stuff that happened in school, and cameras weren't in school, but they had a federal marshal following them around. I mean, and when I went there and asked the National Park Service person about, what happened, how come the National Guard person didn't go ahead and stop this beating and hitting over the head with locks and stuff, and he was like, I was just there to make sure that they didn't die. All right, so that's what was going on in Little Rock Central High School. So the desegregation of the Central High School, if you remember Orville Faubus, he was the governor there, called in the state guard and there, and actually the next year he even canceled school. Then we got into Rosa Parks. You remember Rosa Parks, the secretary of the Montgomery NAACP. She was the one who sat in the first row of the black section in the bus and said, I'm not getting up, when the bus driver told her to get up. And she stayed firm. She stayed firm because she was tired of getting segregated against, tired of just giving in all the time to the white people. So this goes ahead and does the Montgomery bus boycott. Now, this is where we see Martin Luther King come into play, and the civil disobedience and the peaceful protests. This young Baptist minister steps up and goes ahead and leads this civil rights movement. There is speculation on how Martin Luther King was chosen. Was he chosen because he was a born leader and really, really great? Or was he just the newest Baptist minister on the block, and a lot of the Baptist ministers didn't want to lose a lot of their followings if this fell through? So this is the type of situation that Martin Luther King Jr. was put into, and he led the civil rights movement. So you have the Montgomery bus boycott. If you remember, the 90% of African Americans did not ride buses in Montgomery, Alabama, and I think 70% overall didn't ride buses. And the economy for the buses, the money that the bus made really fell through the floor as well. And because of the Montgomery bus boycott, now you have segregation on bus transportation became illegal. And then you had the Greensboro Four, the sit-in movement, the four college students from NCA&T up in Greensboro, North Carolina, sitting at the lunch counter, and they were fighting segregation at the lunch counters, right? There's whites only. Black people had to take their food at a takeout area in a window in the back, even though it was black people serving the counter. So it was a sit-in movement. Remember, it was not illegal. And you had organizations like SNCC come in, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, who had to come in and train them to sit at these events, because these protesters were getting spit at, they were getting harassed, they were getting name called, they were getting punched, they were getting, I mean, just really, really bad harassment and violence against them. And they had to be trained to just sit there and take it, because who do you think would be the one getting arrested in North Carolina or Alabama or Georgia if a African-American person was peacefully protesting on a counter and a white person came up and punched him in the back of the head, and then that African-American got up and turned around and slugged him back? Who do you think would get arrested at that time, right? So they had to sit there and really, really take this violence that was given towards them. Okay, that was the Stokely Carmichael, the Bob Moses, and SNCC. We went over presidents. We went over two. We went over John F. Kennedy, and we went over Lyndon B. Johnson. If you remember, Kennedy, the youngest president, the first Roman Catholic, got elected in 1960. However, in 1963, he's assassinated, so he's not able to pass all of these civil rights legislations that he believed in. He did believe in raising minimum wage, cutting taxes, spending on the military. He believed in sending somebody to the moon. He's like, we're going to send somebody to the moon. Okay, so that's what Kennedy's new frontier is. He's a new frontier for the United States. After John F. Kennedy is assassinated, Lyndon B. Johnson, his vice president, is sworn in. He has this plan called the Great Society, which the housing and urban development, Medicaid, Medicare, money to go ahead and try to fix up poverty-stricken areas. And remember what I said, the Great Society kind of gets canceled out because of the Vietnam War. We have other civil rights movements. We have the Birmingham March, the Birmingham, Alabama March. Remember that they were protesting, and Eugene Bull Connor, the sheriff down there in Birmingham, released the police dogs and fired the protesters with water hoses from like fire trucks and fire hydrants. You also have King's March on Washington. Remember the support for the Civil Rights Bill that Kennedy proposed. 250,000 people submerged onto the lawn in Washington, D.C., and where King gives his famous "I have a dream" speech. Okay, I have a dream that, you know, his children and white children could one day go to school together and have equal rights. All right, so that's what's going on. Remember what I said, whenever you have civil rights protests, you're going to have civil rights violence. That's what's going to happen. We also went over, let's see, presidents of civil rights, violent movements, reaction. We went over Stokely Carmichael. We went over the Black Power movement. We have other minority groups that we're going over. If you remember correctly, oh, I'm missing a page. You had the Hispanic Americans with Cesar Chavez, the United Farmers, the United Farmer Worker Union, for the grape growers. He's fighting for more wages, and he wins them. He wins the more wages and the rights for the workers in the United Farm Workers Union. Remember, Chavez followed King with civil disobedience and peaceful protesting. And remember what we said about Chavez? He was the guy who did those hunger strikes and really brought the attention upon his cause via the hunger strikes. We also went over women with NOW, the National Organization of Women, trying to get passage of the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, and how women are sick and tired of, you know, are saying that they had to quit their jobs because men came back from war. They had to become the housewife. They had to sit there and enjoy all the, you know, the dishwashers and washing machines and the dryers. You know, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be a housewife. You know, you're supposed to take care of the kids. And they're like, I don't think so. I want to become a biologist. I want to become a chemist. I want to go ahead and make a difference in the business world, right? So women were like, you know, I'm going to go ahead and I want equal rights. So the Equal Rights Amendment, remember, was originally approved by Congress, but it's never passed. So the Equal Rights Amendment still today doesn't pass because you have women out there who actually didn't want the ERA to pass because they were happy being having that stigma of being a housewife at home. You also had Native Americans fighting for rights. You also had the disabled and the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990 coming through and giving rights to the disabled. Remember, it says that there was no more segregation or discrimination based on the fact that they were disabled. And remember that jobs could do that at one time. They could say, I'm sorry, I'm not hiring you because you're disabled. All right, so you have during the 50s and 60s, remember, you have all these groups and these activists and these protesters, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, women, the disabled. You have everybody jumping in on this during this 1950s and 60s to go ahead and fight for their civil rights and fight for equality. And remember what I said, all of this comes to an end basically with the starting and continuation of the Vietnam War. Good luck on your test.